We all remember how Mickey Lolich won those 3 games in the 1968 World Series and led the Tigers to victory over the St. Louis Cardinals. Mickey had a long career in Detroit, 1963 to 1975, and you certainly accomplished an awful lot. What's your feeling about Tiger Stadium?
Well, first off, Tiger Stadium is the first Major League Baseball park that I ever walked into or saw in my whole lifetime. I saw the Angels, not the Angels, but the Dodgers and the Giants play in Old Seal Stadium out there in the Pacific Coast League area before they, became a major league. I mean, they were major league teams, but they're playing in a minor league park. So I had never seen a major league park. And lo and behold, when I got called up from Syracuse, the Tigers were at home. And so when I walked into Tiger Stadium, it was my first sight of a major league ballpark, and it was sort of overwhelming because it's a big park with a tremendous amount of seats and totally enclosed almost, and it was quite an impression to me. It was like, wow, this is nice. But Tiger Stadium meant a lot to me. I mean, I spent my whole career there, as a Tiger, and it was an old lady, I'll admit it, and but it was a neat ballpark. I mean, I traveled all around the American League, and I also played in the National League for 3 years. And Tiger Stadium is just one of those very unique ballparks. I have never ran into a single player who said they hated the ballpark. All the American League players enjoyed playing there because they always talked about hitting, because it was such a great place for hitters to see. And I can honestly say that being I pitched in the American League and the National League, as a pitcher, it was the hardest park to pitch in the big leagues. I was a left-hander, and I pitched in Fenway Park, and I didn't have a lot of trouble in Fenway Park because you could set hitters up and do certain things to them. But in Tiger Stadium, they always talked about the swirling winds and the overhang and that type of stuff. And I mean, you could throw a perfect pitch on a guy and jam him on the fist, and he'd pop it out towards left field, and the darn thing would fall in the first row all the time. And it was a tough park to pitch in, but it was still my home, and really enjoyed playing there.
In Detroit, you won 18 games, you won 19 games, you won 22 games, and you won 25 games. But to me, I never saw anybody in Detroit, Jack Morris, Jim Bunning, Denny McClain, even Denny. I never saw a guy have a season like you had in 71. You won 25 games, you lost 14. But Mickey, you pitched 376 innings and 29 complete games. 29 complete games is a whole decade for the Tigers staff today. How do you do 29 games? Was that just how the game was played then? But that's by today's standards, and it's just an incredible number of games to complete.
Well, it all comes down to that it was the first year that Billy Martin became the manager of the Tigers, and he called me down to downtown Detroit to the old Sheridan Cadillac to have lunch with him during the winter. And he says, "You're not going to believe this, but I'm going to tell you something right now." He says, "When you start a ball game," he says, "you are going to stay in the ball game until the 7th inning." He says, "You're the best pitcher I got." He says, "You're the best." He says, "You're better than what I got out there in the bullpen." And he says, "I am not going to take the ball away from you." He says, "The first 7 innings belong to you, come hell or high water." And I mean it. Well, a lot of managers tell you this kind of stuff, but I remember I was pitching in a ball game, and I was down 4-0 in the 2nd inning, and I looked over towards the bench, and Billy was standing there with his arms folded, looking out at me. I looked at the bullpen. Nobody's warming up. I finally got out of the inning. I came back in, and he says, "What were you looking at?" And I says, "Well," I said, "I really don't have too good of stuff out there today." He says, "I told you, this game is yours till the 7th inning, and you better bear down." I actually came back and won that ball game, and he set the mode for me right there. I knew that I had to pitch the first 7 innings of the game no matter what the score was, and in return, he put a vote of confidence into me that I wasn't looking over my shoulder all the time to see if somebody was warming up, because I had a runner on 1st and 3rd and nobody out, and I'd give up 1 run that inning, but it was only 1 run, and I had a pretty darn good year that year as far as earned run average, and usually when I went to the 7th inning, I had a lead, and that's why I ended up pitching 29 complete ball games.
Today the standard, I think, is to pitch 200 innings. They get these ball players, these pitchers, and they know they're only going to pitch 6 or 7 innings, and if you can make 200 for the season, it's a good season. But 376 innings, I never saw you have a sore arm. If you had one, you hit it.
Oh no, Joe, I never did have a sore arm. The good Lord gave me a great arm. I mean, sure, it got tired sometimes, but as far as having any injury in there that prevented me from throwing, I never had it. And I pitched 376 innings that year, but I also pitched 300 the next year. I pitched 300 innings for 4 consecutive years, and a lot of people don't do that anymore. And anymore, I don't know who's done it. The only thing that irritated me about the whole thing was I pitched 376 innings. I set an American League record, a sort of a modern day record. And the next year, Wilbur Wood pitched 376 and 1/3 inning.
All right. A favorite memory about Tiger Stadium? Maybe it was game number 5, the '68 series, or whatever. Do you have a favorite?
Well, I do, but it really has nothing to do with the game, so I don't know if you want me to tell you about it or not. But
As long as it's clean, Mickey, you go ahead.
Yes, I was, one day we were taking batting practice. It was a Saturday game. It was going to be a Saturday evening game, and I was standing out by the left field scoreboard, the one that sat down on the ground. And through the course of batting practice, as I was standing down there, I was unscrewing the light bulbs in the scoreboard, and I actually got all of them. And here, here comes game time, and they throw on all the scoreboard lights, and this one scoreboard wouldn't light, So I was talking to, I can't think of his name right now, who was like the stadium manager was Ralph Snyder at the time. So they get the electrician in the ballpark, and they run down and they check all the circuit breakers and everything, and it's like, why isn't the scoreboard working? And they scuffled with it for about 2 innings, and finally they couldn't figure it out. So they called in Detroit Edison. They had to bring in a specialist, and the specialist comes in, and they're checking everything, and the guy is, is there a switch out on the scoreboard? Yeah, there's a switch out there. And so between innings, the guy runs out there, he checks a switch, it's in the on position. He comes back in, he says, I can't figure out what's wrong with that scoreboard. He says, everything is testing fine. And finally, John Kosovac, he was the maintenance guy there, he says, he says, during batting practice, he says, I saw Lolich standing out by the scoreboard. And they says, well, what's that got to do with it? He says, well, he's always up to something. He says, do you think he unscrewed the light bulbs? And they says, oh, he couldn't have unscrewed the light bulbs. There's too many of them. And so between innings, they went out there and they turned the first light bulb, and guess what? It came on, Well, anyway, it came down to me a couple days later, that actually I talked to Jim Campbell later, and he says, do you know how much it cost us to bring that guy in from Detroit Edison on a Saturday, an off day? We had to pay him triple time to come in. He says, it cost us a fortune. And I says, well, that's the way it goes, Jim. And he says, that's one of the best practical jokes I ever saw. And he says, I do appreciate it.
Mick, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about your 3 victories in the '68 series. I know you've been over it. It's why you're so acclaimed and why people remember you so well. But that game 5 in Detroit, we can talk about the 2 in St. Louis, but that is in St. Louis. Tell me about game 5, what that was like. You had to stay alive. You had to win that game. You were down 3-1 to the Cardinals, and you and K-Line did it.
Well, that game was, the pivotal game in the World Series, really. We all know that. And I have a good memories about that ball game, and I mean, a lot of them are not what you'd think they'd be. For some reason, Johnny Sane, my pitching coach, and myself forgot about pregame ceremonies that go through. I mean, neither one of us, remembered. I mean, under the stress, the pressure, I don't know. I had a routine that I always went through, that I would go down to the bullpen, like 15 minutes before game time. And I would throw X amount of warm-up pitches, which generally took me about 12 minutes. I'd take 12 minutes to warm up for a ball game. And then I'd walk back to the dugout and I'd be ready to go. Well, as I start my warm-ups, the bullpen's in the shadows at that particular time of year in October. I get almost halfway through my warm-up, if I get that far, and all of a sudden we're going to do the national anthem, which is right in the middle of me warming up. And if you remember, Jose Feliciano did a rendition of the national anthem that lasted a long, long time. All of a sudden, that's over. I have totally cooled down, and now I start throwing again. and they're doing the meeting at home plate and all that type of stuff. And the umpire comes down to me and he says, you got to go, Mick. We got to get out, get the game started. And I says, I'm not even ready to pitch. He says, look it. He says, we're on national television. We got to go. We got to go. He says, take some extra warm-up pitches out there on the mound. Well, I went along with it because he was so demanding. And when I went out there on the mound, I hadn't even thrown a breaking ball yet. And I continued to throw nothing but fastballs to get loose. And in the first inning, I gave up the 3-run home run to Orlando Cepeda, and he's a dead fastball hitter, and basically I was pitching right to his power, and we're down 3 runs in the first inning, and it wasn't until like the second inning or even into the third inning that I finally started throwing some breaking balls, and now I was in my groove. I was pitching well, but I was behind in the ball game, and I was sort of worried about it. And then when that line drive went to left field, that who hit it? I don't remember right now. That as soon as the ball was hit, I says, "Uh-oh, I'm out of here." And Willie came up with probably the greatest play of his career, that one hopper into freehand that tagged Brock out. And when he tagged Brock out, I said, "Gee, I'm still alive," and got out of the inning. And Mayo came to me and he says, "Are you okay?" And I says, "Yeah." I says, "I'm doing fine." And then we got into the instant, what was it, the 6th inning, I guess? I don't remember, when Gates Brown should have pinched hit for me. Everybody knows that Gates Brown should have pinched hit for me. I went up in the on-deck circle, had my jacket on and everything, and I looked over, and Gates is getting his bat. He's doing the whole thing, and all of a sudden the out is made in front of me, and I turn around and look back towards Mayo, and Mayo motioned me towards the plate. And I'm figuring, well, okay, Gates isn't ready yet. Something's happened. So I take my jacket off. I go up to the plate. I look back, and Mayo's signaling me to get in the batter's box. Well, the first pitch comes across the plate, and I look back at Mayo again, and he says, "Stay in there." And I'm like, what's going on here? I hit that little dead bird base hit into right field, and I eventually came around and scored the tying run to make the game 3-3. K-Line drove me in. So that was quite a game, that 5th game.